Hello there everyone, today's video is all about the new R&D reliefs that were announced in the recent budget just a few days ago, and why I'm going to tell you that they are not actually all that great, the announcements that were made by the Chancellor, and you will shortly see why. So first of all, we need to backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to the back end of 2022, after that disastrous budget by Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, which actually did contain some great tax measures, by the way. It's just the markets didn't like them. Anyway, but then when the new guy got in, he said, look, emergency budget, this is what we're going to do now. This is like 4 or 5 months ago. Just to recap, because this leads into what he announced last week. So, R&D, what was announced at the end of 2022 was a curtailment on the benefits of R&D relief. So, specifically, if you are an SME claiming the SME R&D scheme relief, the so-called additional enhancement used to be the case that if you'd, for every £100 that you'd spent on qualifying R&D, HMRC would say, we'll give you an extra 130%, £130 extra for every £100 you spend on qualifying R&D, which was terrific. So, but it was announced in back end of 22 in the emergency budget, that will be curtailed from 130% to 86% from from 1st of April this year. So a curtailment of R&D, not as much. Why? Because for every reason the Chancellor thought, the government thought it was a distortion in the market. It was too generous a relief. There was actually 2 separate reliefs, one for SMEs, one for big business. They thought the big business one was working well, but the SME one was open to some abuse, particularly on the second strand of the SME scheme, which resulted in what they call repayable credits. So basically, when you work out the numbers and you do your 130% enhancement, if that tripped you over into a loss, then the rules said that you could actually, rather than wait to set the loss off against future profits, because cash flow is key for these businesses, you could surrender the loss for a repayable credit. Now that was at a rate of 14.5%. So let's just say you had a £10,000 loss resulting from the 130% deduction. Rather than wait to carry that 10,000 loss forward and get relief next year at 19%, instead you could have it, surrender it for cash at 14.5%, get it now. So the 14.5% not as good as the 19%, but still on 10,000, that's what is it, 1,450. So you could have that now. So basically he said you can have £1,450 into your company bank account right now, or wait and save 1,900 on your tax bill, whenever that may be, year 2, year 3, whatever. But what they announced at the back end of 22 was that that repayable credit was going to come right down to 10% because there was a lot of perceived abuse in the system. People setting up companies basically with a view to just claiming R&D, getting a repayable credit and then doing one. So the government said, look, I'm going to counter this abuse. We're going to make this repayable credit less generous, going down to 10%. So it's a double hit for the SME team insofar as the SME scheme, insofar as lower deduction in the first place from 130% to 86%, and reduction in the repayable credit from 14.5 to 10. Now, a lot of fanfare last week. This hit the headlines. Oh, great new generous things for R&D. Well, actually, what was announced last week? Let me tell you what was announced last week. So remember, this came in 4 months ago. Last week, oh, R&D intensive companies, extra enhancement, extra relief for those guys. What it was basically, there's obviously been some lobbying behind the scenes by, particularly from a lot of genuine R&D intensive startups who spend a fortune on R&D, that qualify for the SME schemes, who are not taking the Michael. They're not trying to, take funds and do a runner. They are genuinely startups spending a lot on R&D, and they make losses, and cash flow is king. So it's really hitting them hard, or it will do, if they suffer this reduction in 14.5% to 10%, which was brought in to stop all the piss takers. But for all those out there who are not doing that, the government's obviously, they've been kicking off, and the government said, aha, okay, all right, for all you genuine intensive R&D companies out there, what we'll do is basically just reinstate this 14.5%, and it won't go down to 10%. So SMEs, new definition, R&D intensity of at least 40%. So if you meet the criteria for R&D intensity of at least 40%, then you will have your credit at 14.5% restored. So R&D intensity definition, it's just a ratio of your qualifying R&D divided by the total expenditure in your P&L, which is quite easy to work out. And if it's greater than 40%, then your repayable credit, 14.5%, not 10%. But crucially, if you're not in a loss-making position, your additional deduction is going to go down to the 86%, which was already announced in November. So it's only targeting, this latest announcement is only aimed at those businesses that are loss-making, that do a hell of a lot of R&D. 40% of all their expenditure is R&D. They are loss-making, and they will get a cash refund, and it will be restored to the 14.5%, not the 10% that it's going to be for everyone else who doesn't meet this criteria. So when people have been in touch saying, oh, what's all this great new stuff on R&D? You get 40%. No. As you can see, all it's doing is restoring the previous amount on a repayable credit. Now, like I said, this is only for losses where you can surrender it for cash. For many, many thousands of SME businesses who claim the R&D tax relief, who are not making losses, that it is not going to be as generous, because they're going to go from 130 to 86. And this second bit, the repayable credit and the intensity bit, doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean nothing, because it's all about surrendering losses for cash. And specifically, you can only get the generous cashing in amount, if you will, 14.5% instead of 10%, if you are hitting this new R&D intensity ratio. So just an overview there on the new announcements on R&D, which aren't that great, even though on the face of it, everyone was like, oh, something great, something new for R&D. Not particularly, as I've just explained. So if you like this video, please do subscribe. And as always, I'll see you soon.